The Apology, written by Plato, concerns Socrates and him giving a defense of himself. The word apology from Greek means defense, and that's what Socrates is doing in this dialogue. He is defending himself against two charges. The first charge is corrupting the youth, and the second charge is atheism. While these may be the formal charges, they are not the real charges. The real charges are the underlying charges, and that's what Socrates is going to deal with first. A good philosopher, a good thinker, will not deal with the stuff on the surface. They will get deeper, kind of like pulling weeds in the backyard. If you're going to pull weeds in the backyard, do you just pull the top off? I mean, what's going to happen? The weed is still there. It's going to grow back. If you're going to pull a weed out, you pull it from the root. And it's no different in philosophy. It's no different in argumentation when you are searching for the truth, or if you have charges against you. It is best to try to pull the arguments out from the root. This is what Socrates is going to do. Socrates states the underlying charges here. Everybody knows the formal charges, corrupting the youth and atheism, but not everybody may know the underlying charges. So if the underlying charges were going to be stated, which they're not, Socrates says in the Apology that they would be stated like this. Socrates is guilty of wrongdoing, in that he busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. He makes the worse into the stronger argument, and he teaches these same things to others. So what the underlying charges concern, according to Socrates, is that he's really being accused of being this person. Somebody who has their head in the clouds. He goes around manipulating people, showing people how to turn weak arguments into stronger arguments. In other words, they're accusing Socrates of being a sophist. A sophist in the time of Socrates were kind of like a modern day bad lawyer. Someone who has no concern for the truth, just about making money. This is what they're accusing Socrates of being. They're accusing him of being a bad sophist. These people who used to just go around showing people how to argue and manipulate words just so that they can make money. Socrates quickly and easily refutes this. How does he refute it? He doesn't take any fees. He doesn't charge anybody. He says right here, and if you have heard from anyone that I undertake to teach people and charge a fee for it, that is not true either. So this utterly refutes this notion that Socrates is a sophist. So Socrates goes further. Remember, he wants to pull the root out. Socrates is going to tell a story. He's going to tell a story of how he got his start, his beginning, with his way of investigation, his beginning in philosophy. And he starts to talk about a friend of his who went to go see the oracle at Delphi. The oracle at Delphi was this priestess of one of the Greek gods, and she used to tell prophecies and predict things. So Socrates speaks here about his friend who went to go see her. He says, he went to Delphi at one time and ventured to ask the oracle, as I say, gentlemen, do not create a disturbance. He asked if any man was wiser than I, and the Pythian replied that no one was wiser. So his friend asked the oracle if anybody was wiser than Socrates, and the oracle says nobody is wiser than Socrates. This disturbs Socrates. It can be a very uncomfortable thing to think that you are the wisest, and for other people to think that you are the wisest in something. Imagine you're in your math class. Maybe you don't know any algebra, and at one point you didn't know any algebra and you had to take your first algebra class. When you start the algebra class, you don't really know algebra. But imagine you walk into the algebra class and your instructor says, "Boy, I'm glad you're here. You are the wisest person in this class." You know more algebra than everybody, even me. I mean, would that give you maybe a little bit of pressure? Yeah, it'd give you a lot of pressure because you don't know algebra. So imagine that on even a larger scale. There's higher things than knowing algebra. How about questions concerning life and death? How about questions concerning how to raise your family? How about questions concerning the purpose of life? These are all larger questions that we all have, and we're going to ask ourselves at one point in our life. The oracle is saying there's nobody wiser than Socrates. So even concerning these great philosophical questions, Socrates has nobody to go to. Who's he going to go to? He's the wisest one. This puts a lot of pressure on Socrates. Socrates, now he wants to test to see if the oracle is correct, because he wants to show that the oracle is not correct. Socrates says, I went to, well, this is when he goes to the politicians, but what Socrates is, what he also says in the dialogue before this statement right here, is that he wants to go around and he wants to find someone wiser than he is so that he can prove the oracle wrong. Okay? And so the first person people that he's going to go to are those that usually think that they are wise, the politicians. And so he says, I went to one of those reputed wise, thinking that there, if anywhere, I could refute the oracle and say to it, this man is wiser than I, but you said I was. Yeah, that's kind of what I was just saying right there. He's going to go to this politician. He's going to find out this politician is wiser than he is. And then he's going to go to the oracle and say, you said I was the wisest one, but this guy's wiser than I am, so you're wrong. So he just wants to prove that this oracle is wrong and thus relieving this pressure that this puts on him. But what does he find out when he goes to the politician? This is what Socrates is going to do. Socrates is going to go to this politician, several politicians he goes to. And the politician will be saying something, some teaching or some statements, and Socrates will then ask them a question. And he'll ask them something like, what do you mean by justice? What do you mean by honor? Now, when you ask that, what do you mean? You are asking for a definition. That happens to be the first stage in logic, definition. And it's very hard to give a very good definition. Okay, so Socrates will ask these people, what do you mean? Because Socrates doesn't know. He wants to know. What do you mean by this? And what's going to happen is these politicians and these other people, they're not going to be able to answer Socrates. Or they'll give him a definition where Socrates will take it, and then he will show that it leads to an absurd consequence, something called the reduction to absurdity. This is what he's going to do to these politicians. This is why he says this right here. I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile. But he thinks he knows something when he does not. Whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So Socrates questions these politicians. He finds out that what they're saying it leads to absurd consequences. So what they're saying is not true, in other words. But Socrates further concludes, what we see right here from this statement, that he's wiser than this politician. Now, why is he wiser than this politician? Because he reduced the politician's argument to absurdity? No, that's not why he's concluding he's wiser. He's concluding he is wiser than the politician because Socrates knows that he does not know. Whereas the politician, they think they know, but in fact they don't know. In other words, they don't even know their own ignorance. This is the first step to wisdom right here. Recognizing your own ignorance. It is impossible to do real learning if you think you know already when in fact you don't. That stops all learning. Because in order to learn something, you must assume that there is something to learn. If you think you know it all already, then you're not going to learn anything. You already know it. So Socrates finishes with the politician. So he's failed in that respect of finding somebody that's wiser than he is. So he hasn't proved the oracle wrong yet because he hasn't found nobody. He goes to the poets. He went to the politicians, now he goes to the poets. Now mind you, these poets are not like some of the poets you see today. The poets of ancient Greece were taken very serious. The writer of the two great books, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were holy books for these ancient Greeks. The writer of these books was Homer, a great poet, because these books are poems. So the poems and the poets of ancient Greece were taken very serious. Unlike today, when we think about poets today, I mean, what do you think about? I mean, what comes to mind for me, not to put poets down, I mean, poetry is, I mean, it's a good thing, but it's just not taken as serious today. That's my only point I'm making. It's not taken as serious today as it was in ancient Greece. I mean, you think of poets today, you think of like I do, I think of like a coffee shop and somebody saying some poem like lighthearted, you know, it's fun and things like this. But in ancient Greece, these poets were taken seriously. So we see Socrates. He's now going to go to one of the poets. Because what? Because the poets were considered wise. That's why he's going to them. He does the same thing with the poets that he did with the politician. He asks questions. And he starts to question them about their poetry, about what some of their lines mean. Like, you said this in your poem. What do you mean by this? And what does he find out? Here's what he says right here. I'm ashamed to tell you the truth, gentlemen, but I must. Almost all the bystanders might have explained the poems better than their authors could. In other words, the people standing around could explain the meaning of some of the lines in this poetry better than the poets themselves. Mind you, there's people standing around here. So Socrates is doing this stuff when people are standing around. This is one of the things that is going to get Socrates in trouble. He's not doing this investigation and showing the ignorance of these people, just him and them. There's people standing around. So Socrates concludes, I soon realized that poets do not compose their poems with knowledge, but by some inborn talent and by inspiration. Right? Kind of like some of the great musicians, because poetry is music. It's harmony. I mean, some of the great musicians, you hear the story, Beethoven, Mozart, they were like really talented and good when they were children. This is why Socrates says these poems are constructed by some inborn talent and by inspiration rather than wisdom. So Socrates has failed. He has failed to find somebody wiser than he is. So he goes to the craftsman. And we have the same thing going on here with the craftsmen. The craftsmen were looked upon as, some of them were looked upon as being wise. Now, why would that be? Have you ever seen a good craftsman? Maybe you are a craftsman. Maybe you know how to make something really good. I mean, think about it. If you work in some sort of craft where you make something, and you work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you do that for years and years, and you get to be as old as this guy on this screen right here, so you've done it for 40 years, the same thing. You think you might be pretty good at it? Do you think when people watched you do your craft, make the shoe or make a sword or whatever you make, do you think when people watch you after you do something for that long, they might start thinking, wow, that's amazing. How does this person put that shoe together so smoothly? How did they make it so perfect? They're great at this. Right? People might start thinking that about you, right? That you're great at this craft, because you will be great at the craft. Now just magnify that even more, because being a craftsman in ancient Greece is different than it is today. Most of the stuff that we get today, it's made in a factory. It's not a person making the whole thing by hand, every step of the process. So it's magnified even in ancient Greece. You have a person making every step of the shoe, they're doing themselves. And they're not just doing it 5 days a week. 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. That's our time. Some of these people work 7 days a week, from sun up till sundown. So imagine how good some of these craftsmen would be at their work, where people around them might start thinking, whoa, this person is wise. And they'd be correct, because they are wise. But you know what they're wise in? That craft. They are wise in that thing that they're doing. Socrates says, they knew things I did not know, and to that extent they were wiser than I. So Socrates is recognizing wisdom. He is recognizing that the shoemaker has wisdom. But the wisdom concerns the craft that they do. First of all, wisdom is just general knowledge. Okay? So someone who is wise in making shoes, they have general knowledge about shoes that allows them to manipulate and know everything about it, put it together even. But there's different levels of wisdom. Making shoes isn't the highest level of wisdom. There's levels. Socrates recognizes the wisdom of the particular craftsman. But a mistake that people often fall into is that because somebody is wise in one thing, like making shoes or mathematics, that they are wise in other things as well. Socrates says, but men of Athens, the good craftsmen seem to me to have the same fault as the poets. Each of them, because of his success at his craft, thought himself very wise in other most important pursuits. This is the mistake. Because somebody is wise in one thing doesn't necessarily mean they're wise in another thing. But we human beings have a tendency to do this. Both if you are wise in something and you're really good at something, you tend to get, myself too, we tend to get overconfident and start to think, whoa, I'm good at this. And we start to think maybe we're good at something else that we know nothing about. And we look at people this way too. From the outside, we see somebody good at something and we start to think that, hey, this person is so good at this. Maybe it seems like they're good at this. They know things about this other subject too. But Socrates is showing us this is fallacious reasoning. This would be an error in reasoning. Because somebody is good in mathematics, let's say somebody's very good in mathematics, that does not mean that they are good in biology. So it would be a mistake if you are citing somebody, you're using the authority of somebody for a point you're making in biology, but that person is only an expert in mathematics. This is the mistake that Socrates is pointing out here. This is the mistake the craftsmen are making about themselves. Because they're good at their craft, they're thinking that they're wise in this other thing that they know nothing about. This is what's getting Socrates in trouble. He did it with the politicians, he did it with the poets, and he did it with the craftsmen. He's going around and he's showing that even though they are reputed to be wise, he is showing that they are ignorant in a lot of the things that they are saying. This is why Socrates says, as a result of this investigation, men of Athens, I acquired much unpopularity. This is the real charge. The real charge, the underlying charge, the root of why Socrates is in this courtroom is because these people don't like him. Because he has exposed their ignorance. And he's done it, he's exposed the ignorance of some very powerful people. He did it with the politicians. And people don't generally like when they are made to look ignorant, especially when other people are around. And so this is the real charge. The real charge is that these people just don't like him. And so they trumped up a few charges in order to put Socrates into the courtroom. So Socrates is going to deal with the formal charges, and he states them here. Socrates is guilty of corrupting the young and of not believing in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other new spiritual things. So these are the two formal charges that Socrates is going to refute. And he's going to start off with the first one, corrupting the young. Now Socrates is going to bring Meletus, one of his accusers, to the stand. Meletus is actually one of the prosecutors against Socrates. And in this Athenian courtroom, you can interrogate the prosecutor because so much reliance is being put on the testimony of Meletus. And so Socrates is going to put him on the stand, and Socrates is the master interrogator, and he is going to question Meletus and try to expose the falsity of these charges, of this charge in particular of corrupting the young. And so Socrates says, "Come here and tell me, Meletus, surely you consider it of the greatest importance that our young men be as good as possible." And then Meletus says, "Indeed I do." And then Socrates continues, "Come then, tell these men who improves them. You obviously know in view of your concern." So Socrates is just asking him, you're bringing these charges against me concerning corrupting the youth. So tell me, who improves the youth? Socrates continues, "You see, Meletus, that you are silent and know not what to say. Tell me, my good sir, who improves our young men?" And so you can see already Meletus, he really didn't know what to say at first. He was thinking about it. I mean, it's not that complicated of a question. Who improves the youth? And so he was silent, and then look at his first answer right here. The laws. This is what Meletus says. So who improves it? He's accusing Socrates of corrupting the youth. So Socrates asks him, so who improves the youth? Since you're the authority that's accusing me. He was silent. And then he says, the laws. Now, is this a serious answer to this question, do you think? The laws? Of course not. The laws aren't alive. How are they improving the youth? Socrates, listen, this can be a diversion from the actual question of Socrates. This can actually turn into some sort of red herring. In other words, a different argument if Socrates were to fall into this trap. But he doesn't. Socrates goes on to say, that is not what I'm asking, but what person who has knowledge of the laws to begin with. So Meletus, by giving this answer, this was not a serious answer, the laws. And so Socrates spots it right away, and it could have led to some sort of diversion, some other issue. And Socrates spots it, and he brings Meletus back on point. These are the answers that Meletus is going to give to Socrates. Remember, Socrates is asking, who corrupts the youth? And here are the answers from Meletus. The jurymen. Okay, there's hundreds of jurymen in this Athenian courtroom. This isn't like the modern day courtroom in the United States of America. In Athens, they had practically the whole community in there. The jurymen, Meletus says, improve the youth. Okay, do you think that's a serious answer? I mean, who improves the youth? The jurymen. Not a very serious answer again. Who? Socrates, you have to answer. So when somebody gives you a question, a real answer to the question will answer the question. Socrates is asking, who improves the youth? And Meletus says the juryman. Well, I mean, does he know? There's hundreds of jurymen. Does he know every particular juryman in there and what he does every day to improve the youth? This is why this is not a serious answer. And so the next answer he gives is the members of the council. Here we go again. Several different people. This is not a serious answer for the same reasons that the juryman was not a serious answer. And then we have the assembly. Another non-serious answer because it consists of several people, several different people. And then he takes the cake on the last one here. Meletus finally gives the answer of saying all the Athenians improve the youth. And Socrates is the only one that does not improve the youth. All the Athenians. Okay, at this point, do you think that Meletus knows who improves the youth? I mean, it's his testimony and his authority has a large part to do with this charge against Socrates. And this guy cannot name one person who improves the youth. Do you think if you cared about the youth at all, you can name one person who improves the youth? I mean, if somebody were to ask me this question, I mean, I could name somebody in a second. I mean, I can name one of the teachers for my kids. I can name my mom who takes care of the kids sometimes. I can name my wife. It's not that hard. You can name somebody right away who improves the youth if you have any experience at all with the youth and taking care of the youth. Listen, Meletus cannot name one person. So what does this say about Meletus? It says that Meletus doesn't care at all about the youth. Meletus doesn't pay attention to the youth. He can't even name one person who improves the youth. Socrates is going to go a little further here, and he's going to expose Meletus's answers as being nonsense, basically. And he's going to use an analogy. Now, analogies don't prove anything, okay? Analogies give insight into real arguments, okay? And so Socrates is going to give an analogy with the horse trainer and the general public. Now, if somebody has a horse, the trainer typically takes care of the horse, feeds the horse, pets the horse, or whatever else they do with the horse. In other words, they improve the horse. But let's say that horse is one of those horses that people ride on. You know, they pay money to ride on, go take riding lessons or whatever. Now, in this sense, does the general public, the many people, do they improve the horse or do they harm the horse? Well, they harm the horse. The general public, they typically don't know what the horse wants, what the horse needs, and they generally don't care. They don't got time. They got to do other things. And so the general public concerning this horse, you know, they'll use the horse. You know, they give the trainer some money and they use the horse, they ride on the horse, and then they give it back to the trainer. And what does the trainer do? The trainer takes care of the horse. The trainer improves the horse. The point Socrates is making here is that the trainer, the tutor, improves the youth, the child. Whereas the general public, they typically harm the child. Okay, this is the point that Socrates is making. What does the child receive from the general public? What does the child receive when he's around his friends? I mean, is he learning mathematics? I mean, do children, when they're around a group of their friends, learn mathematics? Or do they typically come back to the house with some bad habits that they didn't have previously? Listen, the general public typically harms the youth or the child. Socrates is using this analogy to further show that the answers from Meletus are quite absurd, because saying that the assembly or that all the Athenians improve the youth, where only Socrates harms the youth, is absurd. And it's like this horse analogy. Socrates, as a tutor, as an instructor to the youth, he improves them. And the general public, they generally harm them. So that's the point that Socrates is emphasizing with this analogy. And so Socrates is going to conclude here, which you probably already concluded, hopefully. Socrates says, "You have made it sufficiently obvious, Meletus, that you have never had any concern for our youth. You show your indifference clearly, that you have given no thought to the subjects about which you me to okay, I didn't put the other word there. About which you take me to trial," is what it's supposed to say. So Socrates is telling Meletus what we already know. You don't care about the youth. You couldn't even name one person who improved the youth, and you gave the absurd answer that all the Athenians improved the youth, and Socrates is the only one that hurts the youth. Meletus can't possibly know all the Athenians and he doesn't even know them by name. He probably hasn't seen all the Athenians. So he definitely can't know whether each one of them improves the youth unless he's like following around each Athenian all day, seeing how they improve the youth. So Socrates refutes this charge against him. Second charge, atheism. So atheism is the belief in no God or gods. That's what atheism means. So this is what the second charge is. So Socrates states, "Nonetheless, tell us, Meletus, how you say that I corrupt the young. Or is it obvious from your deposition that it is by teaching them not to believe in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other new spiritual things? Is this not what you say I teach and so corrupt them?" So Meletus is claiming that Socrates believes in other new spiritual things and that he does not believe in the gods in whom the city believes. So Meletus is claiming, and the accusers, because it's not just Meletus, it's other people as well, they are saying that Socrates is teaching this to people, to kids, to adults, whoever, to not believe in the gods in whom the city believes in. And I would have to say, if you read some of the other dialogues, there may be some truth there. Socrates is not a big fan of, you could pretty much get from reading the dialogues that Socrates does not believe in some of these Greek gods, but that's a different story. So here's the charge. He does not believe in the gods in whom the city believes in, but other new spiritual things. So they're claiming Socrates believes in these other strange spiritual things. And if you know anything about Socrates, he does believe in some strange spiritual things, especially to these Athenians, because sometimes Socrates will talk to voices. He hears voices in his head, I don't know whether they're real or not, but they prevent Socrates from doing something that he ought not do. And so he's always dialoguing with these spiritual voices. And Socrates always mentions, and he does it a lot in the Apology, he mentions the God. He says this, the God wants me to do this. The God has put him on a mission. In fact, he thinks that the mission he's on right now to do philosophy and search for the truth is from the God. Now think about that. The God. What is he referring? Does that sound like one of the Greek gods? If that's Zeus, then why doesn't he just say it? If that's Hera, these are Greek gods, why doesn't he just say that God? He says the God. So that implies that he's talking about some one God, some strange God, some God that the Athenians are not very familiar with. And so there might be some truth to these charges here, that he believes in these other new spiritual things. And so he goes on here, that is most certainly what I do say. That's Meletus. Meletus is agreeing. This is how you argue. You pose the question, and then you get the other person to say, yes, that's what I mean. Okay. What you don't do is lay out an argument or lay out a question that somebody doesn't understand. You want to make sure that you're getting agreement, that you're on the same page, because you're after the truth here. And in particular, in this case for Socrates, he's after the truth of whether he's guilty of these charges. And so Meletus says, that's most certainly what I do say. I am saying what you just stated right here. So Socrates continues, or whether you mean that I do not believe in gods at all, and that this is what I teach to others. So Socrates he's continuing asking questions of Meletus. Or whether you mean that I do not believe in gods at all, and that this is what I teach to others. And what does Meletus say? This is what I mean, that you do not believe in gods at all. You see it already, I hope. I hope you see some inconsistency here. If you're following along with what I'm saying, you should already feel a little uncomfortable with the statements that Meletus has agreed to. Socrates is saying, so, are you saying that I don't believe in any gods? That's true atheism right there. He doesn't believe in any gods. And Meletus says, yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. I agree. And here's what Socrates concludes. I think he contradicts himself in the affidavit as if he said Socrates is guilty of not believing in gods, but believing in gods. And surely that is the part of a jester. So, Socrates is saying that Meletus is claiming two opposing statements at the same time in the same respect. This is what a contradiction is. And I hope you saw it already. Remember, Meletus agreed to the first statement that Socrates made. Socrates said, hey, are you saying that I'm teaching people to not believe in the Greek gods, but other new spiritual things? But now you're saying that I don't believe in any gods. This is a contradiction. This is the part of a jester. Why would it be a part of a jester? Like a part of jokes or something like this, of somebody cracking jokes to make you laugh. Because contradictions, if you understand the words and the statements in a contradiction that is stated, then it's kind of funny sometimes because it's so absurd. What I mean by this, if there's a contradiction in physics or in high-level mathematics, and you're not a mathematician or a physicist, you probably won't get the contradiction, and it won't be funny to you. But if somebody says a contradiction and they're using normal language, like with normal things that you understand, then it can be somewhat funny sometimes because contradictions are absurd. Socrates is going to expose what the contradiction is exactly. He says at the top here, does any man believe in spiritual activities who does not believe in spirits? Meletus says, no one. So remember, Meletus has agreed that Socrates believes in other new spiritual things. Socrates continues, do we not believe spirits to be either gods or the children of gods? Yes or no? And Meletus says, yes, of course. Meletus has agreed to this. Socrates is not doing trapping here. He's getting Meletus to state his beliefs and essentially the statements that are going to unravel this phony charge against Socrates. He says, do we not believe spirits to be either gods or children of gods? In other words, these spiritual things that Socrates believes in, they are children of gods. This is what they believe. So what does that mean? So if you have a baby lion, there's some lion cub, Who would the parents be? Would the parents be a turtle? So you see a lion and you think, oh, their parents must be that turtle over there. Or it must be that deer. No, of course, that would be absurd. If there's a lion, like a younger lion, then obviously the parents would have to be a lion. You don't expect a human, like some woman's pregnant, you don't expect her to give birth to like a lizard or something like this, right? Because humans come from humans. Likewise, if they believe that these spiritual things, these spirits, are children of God's, then what does that mean? That means they are also gods because they came from gods. So that means they're also gods. So, I mean, you should see by this point that this charge is refuted. Socrates is not an atheist. Here's the contradiction laid out so we can see it very clearly. We have Socrates is an atheist. That's the first statement. And then we have the second statement. Socrates is not an atheist. So these two statements are in contradiction. So what that means is that one of the statements must be true and the other one must be false. Okay, so if Socrates is an atheist, you can't, if that's true, the other statement, Socrates is not an atheist, cannot possibly be true. One of them must be true and the other one must be false. So Socrates has shown that what Meletus is saying is a contradiction because he is saying both of these statements. He is saying that Socrates is an atheist. That's what he said earlier. And then we're concluding that Socrates is not an atheist because he believes in these spiritual things who are children of gods. So this is the contradiction. And the contradiction is the ultimate refutation of an argument. After Socrates refutes the two charges against him, Socrates goes on to explain that he is valuable to the Athenians. Remember, he's being judged here. They're judging whether he is guilty of the charges, and then they're going to judge on the punishment. And so Socrates goes on talking to the jury, and he's saying he's a valuable gadfly. This gadfly is that fly right there. It's an irritating fly, and it stings cattle. So why would Socrates say this about himself? He's a valuable gadfly. He goes around stinging people. He says this right here, and needed to be stirred up by a kind of gadfly. Who needs to be stirred up? The people. Socrates goes around stinging people like a gadfly. And even in some of the other parts of some of the other dialogues, he refers to himself as a stingray. He goes around stinging people. He's stinging people out of their ignorance. He's going around and he's questioning people. He's going around and he's refuting the points that people are making. And he's showing that the beliefs and the supposed knowledge that people have, it may not be true. He did it with the politicians. He did it with the craftsmen. He just did it to Meletus. So the reason why he's saying it's a gadfly and he's stinging people is because it hurts. When you have your argument refuted and shown to be absurd, that can hurt you. Why can it hurt you? Because some of these things that you think you know, that I think I know right now, some of the things that we believe, in other words, some of the things that we think are knowledge that are not really knowledge. If somebody were to refute those things with good arguments, that would hurt us, right? Some of the things that we believe, I mean, we believed them since we were kids. Our parents believed them. The rest of our family believed those things. And so some of the beliefs we had, we've carried with us for years. You think we're just going to give that up in a second because somebody gives us a good argument? No. I mean, we like to think that we are reasonable. I mean, most of us would say that, yeah, I follow reason. I will follow reason wherever it takes us. But most of the time, that is not the truth. When a reasonable argument is presented to us and it goes against some of our cultural beliefs that we've had for years and years, it is hard for us to just throw those beliefs away and follow this new thing. Right? This is why Socrates says he's a valuable gadfly. He, he can correct you. He can help you from your error. He can lead you into more truth. But it's going to be somewhat painful. It's going to be like he's stinging you, like a stingray, like a gadfly, because when he refutes those beliefs that you've had your whole life, it could hurt you a little bit. Socrates, at this point in the trial, people normally would bring their family in, their kids. I mean, you've seen it. Normally in our modern courtroom, people do this during the sentencing stage of the trial. You know, people will bring in their mom. And what does mom usually do if her son just got convicted of murder and the penalty stage is now up? I mean, what does the mom normally do in the courtroom? Usually starts crying, right? Oh, he was such a good boy. I don't know what happened. Tears coming down. Now, why would they bring the mom in to go through that pain? They just don't bring the mom in. They bring in the wife. They'll bring in the kids. I mean, they'll bring in different people, right? Some guy's convicted. Maybe some guy was in a gang. He gets convicted for murder, and so they bring in. He's found guilty, and they bring in the mother. They bring in all these people, and they're crying. And he was such a good kid. We don't know what happened. He's a good person. He should have leniency. Have mercy on my son. Have mercy on him. Who they don't bring in is the guy's gang member friends. You think they're going to bring them in? Now, why wouldn't they bring those people in to give testimony? Because it's not going to be very helpful. Because normally at this stage of the trial, you are trying to elicit some sort of pity for the person so that the judge and the jury can go lenient on the sentencing. Socrates is going to have none of this. Socrates is not going to try to elicit some sort of pity. He's not going to try to appeal to the pity of the jury. He wants the jury to make their decision based on reason alone. He says, he brought his children and many of his friends and family into court to arouse as much pity as he could. He's talking about what people normally do. But that I do none of these things, even though I may seem to be running the ultimate risk. He is running the ultimate risk because these people are going to try to put him to death. But he's still not going to do it. He has kids. He has a baby. He's not going to bring his baby and his wife in there to cry in front of everybody to elicit and to appeal to the pity of the jury. He wants the jury just to go on reason alone to arrive at the truth. Socrates does not fear death. He says, either the dead are nothing and have no perception of anything, or it is, as we are told, a change and a relocating for the soul from here to another place. When you die, it's going to be either two things. The first thing, it's going to be nothingness. So it's going to be like an endless sleep. So why would he fear just some never-ending sleep? If it's not this endless sleep, this no perception, this nothingness, then his soul is going to live on. And his soul, in other words, his soul is immortal and it's going to outlast death. Another word for the soul is the mind. And so his mind, his soul, is going to go to the place where all the souls go. And guess what? When he's there, he gets to see all the heroes of old. Right? He gets to see all the great Greek heroes, Achilles, and all these other heroes of ancient Greece. And so it's not a bad thing at all, death, for Socrates. Either it's an endless sleep, like right there in that graveyard right there, comfortable bed, or your soul is immortal and it lives on. Now, Socrates believes that his soul is immortal. In fact, he just doesn't believe it. He thinks he knows it. Because in the other dialogues, he's going to give a proof that the soul is immortal. So Socrates thinks that he is going to survive death. And so this is why his only allegiance is towards the truth and towards virtue, because he believes that will be rewarded in the afterlife. And so as far as the first reason he gives of not to be afraid of death, that it would be an endless sleep, that is definitely the weaker part of this argument here. Because in endless sleep, I mean, dying doesn't seem to me to be an endless sleep at all. I mean, because when you sleep, you wake up. But, I mean, dying, if there's nothing afterwards and it's just some endless sleep, that's nothingness. I mean, that seems pretty scary to me. That doesn't seem like a good alternative at all. But the second one, alternative, this idea that his soul is immortal and it will live beyond death, I mean, that sounds pretty appealing. Socrates says, "Now the hour to part has come. I go to die, you go to live. Which of us goes to the better lot is known to no one except the God." Here we go again. This is what got Socrates in trouble in the first place. I mean, this is one of the things that gets Socrates in trouble. The God. He's mentioning this strange God again. Right? This doesn't sound, I mean, does this sound to you like one of the Greek gods? I mean, if it's Zeus or Apollo, then he would just state it. But he says the God. And this is the connection between the ancient Greek philosophy and the Christianity that will come afterwards. When the Christians, after the death of Jesus Christ, there were many the Christian church started out with these Greek documents. So it was people who read Greek and studied Greek, and I mean that's what they were. Some of these Christians who read and spoke Greek, because the Gospels, the New Testament is written in Greek. And so some of these people, they were also familiar and they used to read some of these Greek philosophers. And when these Christians who are reading these pagan Greek philosophers like Plato, the one who wrote this dialogue right here, and he's reading about they're reading about Socrates, and they're reading about this right here, and they notice that Socrates, whoa, he thinks that the soul is immortal. We believe that. That's what these Christians are saying. And then it goes further. Look at what Socrates is doing here. He's mentioning the God. It seems as if Socrates, this pagan, has found our God. Because Christians believe in this one all-powerful, immaterial, spiritual, infinite God. And it seems that Socrates here has not stumbled, he's been using reason. He has been using reason to arrive at there must be this God. Because when he says the God, it seems that he means one God, that he's not talking about many gods. And Aristotle, who is a student of Plato, is going to go even further. He's going to go even further and give demonstrations and proofs for this powerful one, this one mover, that the Christians, again, they're going to read this stuff from these pagan philosophers. These philosophers are not Christian. They're pagans. In other words, non-Christians. And so when these Christians read these philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, of course, Plato is the one who writes about Socrates because Socrates didn't write anything. And so when these Christians read these documents, they're going to be in agreement with some of this stuff. They're going to say, whoa, this sounds pretty good right here. These people are using human reason to arrive at the conclusions that we received through revelation. And you're going to see this melding, this mixing of this Greek philosophy with this Christianity. And this forms one of the bases for Western civilization, this Greek reasoning with this Christian religion. And the Christians will ultimately use the reasoning from the Greeks and the arguments from the Greeks to bolster and to back up some of their doctrines, the Christian doctrines.